So let's go ahead and recite the Heart Sutra together. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagawan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya, Avalokiteshvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element, and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it is not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata Om Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Swaha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagawan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage. It is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagawan having thus spoken, the Venerable Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokiteshvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised that spoken by the Bhagawan. And we'll do the short mandala offering. Just do this in English. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then we do Refuge in Bodhicitta, once in English, twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi daki chanyan gi pe sanam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyabsu chi Daki Chanyan Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Panchir Sangye Drupar Shok. Okay, thank you, Bob. Let's go ahead and do a short meditation then before we begin. Again, just a few minutes in focused meditation on the breath to begin with, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short reflection on bodhicitta. So we bring the best motivation to these teachings on the Heart Sutra tonight. So I'll ring the bell to begin the meditation. So now let's set our motivation together for tonight. Let's do this tonight by recalling the incredible kindness and the qualities of the Buddha. And we're studying the Heart Sutra, which is a discourse on this most profound topic of emptiness that's given through the blessings of the Buddha, inspiring Avalokiteshvara and Shariputra to have this discussion. And the Buddha himself taught extensively on this topic of emptiness in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the other sutras that are in this body of discourses that help us to know this very profound truth about reality. And how amazing that the Buddha, through his compassion, through his kindness, shared these teachings with us and with the beings of this world. You can feel immense joy that these teachings were given by the Buddha, were kept alive by generation after generation in an unbroken lineage all the way back to the Buddha, to our present gurus. We should feel so amazingly blessed to be able to partake of these teachings due to the compassion, due to the kindness of the Buddha and all these amazing gurus. So that brings us to the question, so what do we do with this then? We can study this knowledge and we can learn about emptiness solely for our own benefit. This is what some beings do. Those who practice the path that leads to their own individual liberation use this wisdom realizing emptiness to remove what keeps them in samsara so they can attain the state of nirvana, peace. So we can bring that level of motivation to these teachings, certainly. Because these are within the body of the Mahayana scriptures, and because we are here under the influence of our gurus who teach us this Mahayana path, we want to bring the Mahayana motivation. We want to think that we ourselves want to become just like the Buddha, being able to, through our own wisdom and the compassion we have for all beings, impart these teachings to others, help them to come to see the nature of reality so they too can attain the state of Buddhahood. Of course, that means we have to develop our own wisdom, our own qualities to the state of Buddhahood, to join the ranks of the Buddha and all the other enlightened beings in doing this, helping eventually all sentient beings to attain perfect, complete enlightenment. So this is our motivation, ideally, for these teachings, with a deep appreciation for the kindness of the Buddhas of the past, the present, and even the future who reveal the Dharma. We want to become just like them so we can do the same for the benefit of all sentient beings. Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for joining again tonight in this continuing series on the Heart Sutra. So again, the format for tonight will be similar to last week. I will go for about an hour or so with a lecture, and then we'll have a short break, about 10 minutes. And then when we return, we'll see if there are questions. If there aren't questions, I'll continue doing some teaching, but essentially, see what questions people have. And then whenever we finish with that kind of bit of it, we'll do a little dedication prayer. And then those who would like to stay on and do more discussion of the material, which isn't the same as Q&A. It's certainly kind of just reviewing the material and seeing what your own understanding is. That'll be facilitated by Shanka, so he'll be on to kind of guide people after we've done the dedication. So hope you can stay around for that. So good, let's go ahead and get grounded in where we were in terms of the studies that we're doing here. We saw that the main part of the text that's in terms of the outline is the meaning of the actual text. This is again the commentary that we're using by Tendar Larampa is divided into the meaning of kind of the preliminary stuff and then the meaning of the text. We went through last week and concluded the first point, discussion of the prologue that produces the sutra. We saw that there was the common prologue, which is where, and thus did I hear at one time, blah, 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 blah. And then at that time, the Bhagawan was absorbed and so on. That's the uncommon prologue, showing what was more specifically going on at the time that this sutra was given, this discourse was revealed. So now we're in the discussion of the actual sutra that is produced from that. So this begins with this whole idea of how Shariputra asked his question. Then we're going to go on to how Avalokiteshvara answered. And then the final part where the Buddha is admiring, the teachings that have been given, especially by Avalokiteshvara, how he has said it just how it is and so on. So before we go into this, I just want to share a little bit that comes from the Geshe Rabtin's book called Echoes of Voidness. He says here again, recall that this is one form of the Buddha's speech, is when through the Buddha's mind, beings are encouraged to speak, through the blessings of that Buddha, the inspiration of the Buddha. So it says, through the power of the Buddha's concentration, these two disciples, Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, became involved in a dialogue. This took place quite spontaneously and without any intention on their behalf. The content of their entire conversation was determined solely by the power of the Buddha's concentration. So it's almost like they become sort of tools of the Buddha. They become a manifestation of the Buddha's thoughts coming into words, and they have this whole dialogue that is spontaneous and without any intention from their side. It's coming solely from the blessings of the Buddha that is inspiring them to engage in this conversation. Furthermore, because they themselves, Shariputra and Avalokiteshvara, had already achieved a complete understanding of voidness, they weren't speaking for their own benefit. They weren't trying to teach it to each other or something. Shariputra, when he asks the question, he isn't, wanting to know the wisdom of emptiness for his own benefit. He's being inspired by the Buddha to reveal this, have Avalokiteshvara reveal it for the benefit of other beings. The purpose of their dialogue was to clarify the meaning of emptiness to those disciples who did not yet understand it, and to improve the understanding of those who had only partially understood it. So they actually say Shariputra, as we're going to see, was an arhat. I mentioned last week that Avalokiteshvara was said to be a high-level bodhisattva in terms of his appearance, but could have been a Buddha manifesting as that. We're going to see tonight even Shariputra is said to have been the manifestation of one of these 8 bodhisattvas who were said to be Buddhas. So it gets to be tricky, who's who and what is their level of realization. But this is essentially what's going on here in this sutra, the main part of this sutra. So this is the passage that we're going to begin with, how Shariputra asked his question. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva, Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara. So most of the things in there, I'm not going to do additional explanation on. We're going to see a little bit about who Shariputra is, but we already talked about Bodhisattvas and the greatness of them, the Mahasattva aspect, what an Arya is, Avalokiteshvara, all these we've discussed in previous classes. The question is put forward, how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? Now you'll notice in our text when we go into the commentary that it's going to say son or daughter of the lineage. And there are some versions of the sutra that actually do have son or daughter of the lineage here, as well as in Avalokiteshvara's answer. But essentially in ours, we only have son of the lineage. And there is some kind of point to that when it's raised as just being the son of the lineage. But I'll go into that in a moment. So now let's go to the text. I'll share the screen for that. And again, this is the commentary by Tendar Larumpa that you can access through the link at TNL's website on the same page for this course. It's the Dropbox page that, again, you can find this text at. The first section is from, then by the power of Buddha and so on, wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom. So this is what we just read. Then means, of course, after Avalokiteshvara had been empowered by the Tathagata to fully understand the meaning of what was to be explained. And we can say again, if the Avalokiteshvara was a Buddha, he didn't need to be empowered by the Shakyamuni Buddha because he already fully understood the meaning. But nonetheless, there was, in terms of what appeared to be going on, Avalokiteshvara is being empowered by the Buddha to have complete, full understanding of the topic that's to be explained, which of course is the wisdom of emptiness, the main topic, as well as the paths and grounds that lead one to attaining that state. Venerable, when he calls him Venerable Shariputra, is a term which is generally famous for addressing those who are junior to oneself. But if this term is a term that occurs in the context of the compilation of the word of the Buddha, it's not correct that Shariputra was junior in training to the compiler Ananda. Remember, we spoke of Ananda not even having been an arhat, but Shariputra has the appearance of being an arhat. So it wouldn't be right for Ananda to be calling him venerable as a junior to him, because he's not. He's actually senior in his realizations and so on to Ananda. Therefore, this term venerable is spoken with the special meaning of one endowed with a life that has abandoned the afflictions and that is free from birth and death by actions and afflictions. In other words, it is a term that is meaning this is an arhat. This is a being who has attained complete freedom from the afflictions, free from birth and death by actions and afflictions. When someone attains that in that life, they continue to live out that life that with that body that was created through the force of their prior karma, but they don't have any further birth or death. They will pass from this life and go into that state of solitary nirvana, the abiding in that state of solitary peace. So again, this is what Venerable is meaning here. This is referring to Shariputra as being an arhat, someone who has attained that. Regarding the name Shariputra, a child who was an emanation of the Bodhisattva, Savar Nivarana Viskambhim. Remember, we saw him last week. He was one of the 8 bodhisattvas. As I said earlier, this text and some other texts say that this Shariputra is actually an emanation of this Buddha. Or it says bodhisattva there, but again, it's hard to tell, as I said, who's who. Avalokiteshvara and certainly some of the others who were in the retinue of the Buddha as perfect bodhisattvas, showing that aspect, were actually said to be enlightened beings already. They were already Buddhas who were trying to show that aspect to those inclined towards the Mahayana, so that they could see what it means to practice as a perfect bodhisattva. And I would imagine that this Savar Nivarana Viskambin was also in the same situation of a manifestation of an enlightened being in that form of a bodhisattva. And of course, Shariputra is an emanation of that being, so it gets to be, again, a combination of emanations. They do say that, of course, Buddhas can emanate spontaneously in many, many ways, or a multitude of ways. There's no limit. But bodhisattvas can manifest an emanation, but it's dependent upon what their level of realization. When one attains the path of seeing, which we'll be talking about probably in next week's class, that is the first direct realization of emptiness. You have 100 emanations you can emanate, and then it goes up exponentially as you go through the remaining grounds. But anyway, regarding Shariputra, we said again that this is a child who was born from the union of his mother, Sharika, who had eyes like a Sharika bird that lives in the reed or Nalandra forests, and his father, Tishya. So because his mother was Sharika, Putra means son, so it would be son of Sharika, son of Shari, Shariputra. His name taken from his father was Upatishya, and his name taken from his mother then was Shariputra. So he could have been called Upatishya, which would be, again, another way of talking about the son of Tishya, or I don't know what Upa means anyway, but Putra means son generally. So because he was of the Sharadvati family, he is also called Sharadvati Putra, the son of the Sharadvati family. So that's, again, why we see the different name that's given to Shariputra in that one line that's coming up from Avalokiteshvara. Son and daughter of the good lineage means those who have the Mahayana lineage. Let me take the screen up just a little bit here. Those who have the Mahayana lineage. In other words, these are beings who have awakened their aspiration to attain enlightenment, their aspiration to become a Buddha. They do say that some beings have the Hinayana lineage of a hearer or a solitary realizer. Remember, there are 2 different practitioners within the Hinayana lineage. They don't have the strength of compassion that will lead them onto that path. And we're going to look in a moment at some slides that give some better shape for what that means to be someone who is of the Mahayana lineage, of the good lineage. The purpose of saying son and daughter, and this is again in this context with this translation. In ours, it's only son, but it says the purpose of saying son and daughter is that only those who are male or female, kind of more set in their gender, can create all the good qualities of the path and the realizations. Those who are eunuchs, who are neutered, and impotent people. Impotent is kind of a strange translation of this. Usually they talk about hermaphrodites, people who are not specific in their gender, who have actually the genitalia of both male and female. Again, these are very traditional teachings that say this. We're going to look at some other more contemporary teachings that talk about it in a slightly different light. But they do say that this having any confusion around one's gender creates not such a stable mind as a platform for realizing emptiness. So again, we'll see some additional things on that shortly. So it says, therefore, it is said, in order to exclude them, to say that these are the ones who can ideally practice this perfection of wisdom, are those who are set in their gender. And again, I know this gets to be kind of opening a can of worms, but we'll see what His Holiness has to say about it as well in just a moment. And then it says, whosoever means distinctions are not made, that is, anyone who does not fear emptiness and who has interest in emptiness is suitable. So let's go ahead and go to the slides, and then when I come back, I will go to continue with the commentary, and we can share a little bit of what these other teachers say about this. First of all, just explaining again, Shariputra was one of the two main Arhat disciples of the Buddha. Sometimes you see tankas, paintings of the Buddha, where you have the Buddha flanked by one person to the right and one to the left. The one to the right is Shariputra, to his right, not our right, and the one to his left is Madgalyayana, who was an arhat who excelled in the practice of emanation. Shariputra, as we saw, was said to be an emanation of the Bodhisattvas Savanarvirana Viskambim, who was among the 8 bodhisattvas in the close entourage of the Buddha that we looked at last week, because we wanted to talk about Avalokiteshvara being one of those 8 bodhisattvas. This is a little, image of Shariputra. Again, you can see he's standing usually to the Buddha's right, so kind of looking to the left at the Buddha, and then the other one, Madgalyayana, is on his left, looking a bit to his right. So that's just an image of Shariputra. They're often there again as kind of the two Arhat disciples that were in the retinue of the Buddha. I wouldn't say at all times, but pretty much at all times. So now we go to Geshe Rabtin's commentary on what we just looked at. Likewise, the power of Buddha's concentration blessed Shariputra, inspiring him to approach Avalokiteshvara and ask him about the means of developing an understanding of voidness. The question, this is from Geshe Tenzin Temple, who was the second Geshe over in Italy when I studied at the master's program. He's one of the main Geshes there now after my teacher passed away. But he says, the question, how should one train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom and so on, sets out the 3. That which is to be practiced, which is again the profound perfection of wisdom, that practice of the perfection of wisdom, the practitioner who practices it, the one, which again would be the son or daughter of the good lineage, as Avalokiteshvara is going to respond, and then how it is to be practiced. Of course, he's asking the question, how is it? Shariputra already knows how it is to practice this because he already has that realization. But again, he's putting forward the question so that Avalokiteshvara can answer it in detail about how that realization is to be attained, how it is actually to be practiced. So this is from Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's book. He says, children of the noble lineage, he put them both together, sons and daughters, are those whose Mahayana disposition has awakened and who have developed the spirit of enlightenment, bodhicitta. Of course, that's what makes one a bodhisattva, is having bodhicitta in an uncontrived, a spontaneous way. But we can, prior to developing bodhicitta, awaken our Mahayana lineage. How do we do that? That's in this footnote that was in that book. It says the Mahayana lineage is awakened when we develop great compassion, the wish to free all living beings without exception from suffering. So this is called great compassion because it's not just may all sentient beings be free from suffering. How wonderful if that would happen. It's saying, I will do this. I will free them. I will protect them from suffering. So great compassion is the mind that gets cultivated into bodhicitta, as well as great love, which is the wish to place all beings in happiness and the complete happiness of that they can attain. So taking heartfelt refuge again and again, he also says, acts as one of the causes for the disposition to awaken. And of course, we generally have other causes. We become exposed to the Mahayana lineage through the teachings of our gurus who try to help us to awaken that great compassion within ourselves. But this is the seed of it. So what we mean when we say, again, children of the noble lineage are those whose Mahayana lineage has been awakened through the force of great compassion that they've developed, because great compassion is the seed that will give rise to that mind. In fact, Chandrakirti, who wrote a commentary on Nagarjuna's, what's sort of an extension of Nagarjuna's text on the middle way, pays homage to great compassion at the very beginning because it's such an important mind for us to work on and develop. So he says here, however, the implied reference, this is from His Holiness now, here, however, the implied reference with this idea of children of the noble lineage has to do with 3 types of being beings who realize the three types of enlightenment. And again, we sometimes call them all enlightenment. We call them a lesser enlightenment for the listeners, the hearers, Shravakas, the Pratyeka Buddhas, which are the solitary realizers, and then, of course, the Buddhas who attain complete, full enlightenment. But oftentimes we call the enlightenment of those other two, the Shravakas and the Pratyeka Buddhas, simply liberation, because they don't attain the full enlightenment that a Buddha does. Specifically, His Holiness says the implied reference is to someone whose spiritual inclination is toward the Bodhisattva's path to Buddhahood. One awakens to such an inclination through the cultivation of great compassion. So it's not saying anything horribly new. It's just a reiteration of this in His Holiness's words. So he's saying that what we mean when we say son or daughter of a good lineage, we're talking about someone who has this aspiration, this inclination towards the Bodhisattva's path that has been developed through their own cultivation of this idea of great compassion. So let's go back to the commentary and we'll go on to the question. This is where our commentary talks a little bit about the question that Avalokiteshvara is putting forward. I'm sorry, that Shariputra is putting forward to Avalokiteshvara. It says, with respect to how should one train who wishes to practice the profound perfection of wisdom and so on, that which is the profound practice of the perfection of wisdom is the practice of the meaning of the perfection of wisdom. In other words, how to practice the meaning of emptiness, of the wisdom realizing emptiness. He asks how those who wish to act, that is, who wish to practice, should actually practice it. So again, we have the people, the practitioners who want to do that. What is to be practiced? And of course, the question is, how should one practice? And then this I'm going to skip over because this just gets into Tibetan and I don't think it's so important. Yeah, we just go on. The very end of it, it says, his commentary, the practitioner is the person, the bodhisattva, the practice is the doctrine, the perfection of wisdom. And of course, how to practice is what Avalokiteshvara is going to share. So before we go on to that part of it, let's go back to the slides. And sorry to toggle back and forth between these a bit tonight, but here, this is from the text that, again, you can have free access to. It's in the reading list that's out at the Dropbox that's translated by Venerable Fedor by Choni Dokpa Shedrup. The question is asking how a person who wants to train with effort in the profound practice of the perfection of wisdom, who wants to achieve the perfection of wisdom, should train on what are called here the paths of accumulation, preparation, seeing, and meditation. So again, I'm going to go into these in more detail next week. Be mindful that you do have a handout that pertains to these. It's called the Mahayana Path. And essentially, there are 5 paths of the Mahayana. 4 of them are here. Accumulation is the first, and one enters the path of accumulation again with that uncontrived bodhicitta, that spontaneous bodhicitta. And then one goes on to the path of preparation, where one prepares oneself to realize emptiness directly. And then that is the third path, the path of seeing. The path of seeing is your initial direct realization of emptiness. For someone who newly enters the bodhisattva path, that is their kind of a very important demarcation. They become an Arya being at that point. They have that wisdom realizing emptiness directly, non-conceptually. And then they go on to cultivate that again and again. That's why the last of the 4 that are on the learning path is called the path of meditation. The path of meditation goes on for some time because the bodhisattva has to remove more and more obscurations and eventually enter what is called the path of no more learning, where they're no longer a bodhisattva. At that point, they're a Buddha. So again, I will go through the whole chart and talk a little bit more about the 5 paths in next week's class when we start talking about some additional things with regard to the answer of Avalokiteshvara. But continuing now with some oral commentary by Geshe Ngawang Dakpa, he says something very similar to this previous slide. So, with the question of Shariputra, how does the son or daughter of good lineage who desires to practice the profound prajna paramita go about doing that? What he is asking is how does someone with the Mahayana lineage then proceed to engage in these 5 paths of the Mahayana, the 4 we just mentioned, and of course, again, the path of no more learning, which is the resultant path. By path, we mean a consciousness. We're not talking about a physical path, obviously. We're talking about a path of awareness. So it says that is really the question. How does the practice of the Prajnaparamita accomplish the 5 paths of the Mahayana? How does the bodhisattva go about doing that? The person of good lineage accomplish the perfection of wisdom through these 5 paths. So once more, we do see, last week we talked about how the explicit topic of the Heart Sutra is the wisdom realizing emptiness and emptiness itself. But then the implicit topic, the one that is behind the scenes, is the kind of revelation of the entire 5 paths, how the bodhisattva develops their mind in a serial way all the way to attaining complete enlightenment. All right, so now we go into how Avalokiteshvara answered. And I'm going to kind of talk about it in a couple of parts, because obviously this is the good chunk of the sutra. And I'm going to show you the outline as well in a moment. But the very first part that I want to talk about is right after this. Again, there's not much to say about this first part. He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokiteshvara, said this to the Venerable Shariputra. This is where we see that longer name, different name, son of the family of Sharadvati. Shariputra. And this is again where in this version that we have, he elaborates to say any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom, etc. We're going to look at the rest of that later. Now, why he says son of lineage or daughter of lineage, in some commentaries, they actually do say that when Shariputra only says son of the lineage, that he's using a much more traditional way of approaching things in a very patriarchal way of saying that, there is even in some of these teachings this inclination towards having a male rebirth, and that it's a male body is necessary as a support for the realization of emptiness and all the attainments on the path. But of course, in the Mahayana, this is not so. And this is being made very clear by Avalokiteshvara. Just know that this is one interpretation of this, why it would say son of the lineage from Shariputra's vantage point. He's a Hinayana practitioner. And then Avalokiteshvara would say son or daughter of the lineage. Kind of don't leave out that whole group, because it doesn't matter. From the vantage point of the Mahayana teachings, son of the lineage, daughter of the lineage, they're equal in terms of their ability to realize emptiness. So let me point out a few things in regard to the outline. Again, this is one of the other just single or 2 pages. I think this is a very small document that's out on the Dropbox. We went through the common prologue. Emily very kindly put this together with colored shaded boxes. We went through the uncommon prologue, and now we're in the actual sutra. And so we see again the very first part we just went through, that's in blue up here. Now we're entering into how Avalokiteshvara answered, and this goes on for some time. This is the good chunk of the remainder of the sutra, right? So we have this, what we're going through up here, that's at the top of this. That's why you'll see, again, I'm going to go through the paths next time, because we probably won't get much into these. And if we do, then I'll start teaching on the paths tonight. But essentially, the rest of this answer from Avalokiteshvara gets divided into those 5 paths. First, the first 2 paths, accumulation and preparation, then path of seeing, then path of meditation goes on to the other page, and then the path of no more learning. And then there's some additional information given. So anyway, just know that this is where we're at in terms of entering into the main part of the sutra here with the answer that Avalokiteshvara is giving to this question. So let's go into our commentary and see what Tendar Larampa says about this, how Avalokiteshvara is answering. So he says, actually, well, let me go back to the text or to the slides, because I forgot. Yeah, he doesn't really say much here in terms of, they don't talk so much about what the passage that I just said about son of the lineage or daughter lineage. So let me stop the share here and pull that back up. Okay. So let's see what other teachers say about this. Again, this is also elaborating on what was said earlier in terms of what Shariputra says when sons and daughters of the lineage. So in Geshe Sonam Rinpoche's text, he says, Avalokiteshvara speaks of sons and daughters of the noble lineage. This indicates that those who are distinctly men or women can understand and practice the perfection of wisdom, not those whose gender is unclear, such as eunuchs or hermaphrodites. This is not said out of prejudice, he says, but because their condition is likely to make their minds unstable. Now, again, by this, he says likely to make their minds unstable. I would say that if someone has a very stable mind, in spite of whatever gender confusion there might be with those issues, that one may be still a candidate to realize emptiness. It doesn't mean, again, that there's some sort of, black and white issue here. It's, either you do or you don't, and kind of thing. If it is so difficult, he says, for those with a mind more stable than our own to gain these insights, how much more difficult would it be for those who with an even less stable mind? So he's kind of pointing out that maybe, yeah, a lot of us don't have the stablest minds to begin with either. But if we talk about people who have a less stable mind than ourselves due to that particular issue, then perhaps they wouldn't be as inclined to have the ability to realize emptiness. We can see how much we ourselves struggle with that. And then from Echoes of Voidness by Geshe Rabten, he talks about this as well. He says, Avalokiteshvara starts to set forth the way in which any son or daughter of the noble lineage should meditate on voidness. It should be noted that he says, whatever son or daughter. This emphasizes the fact that the perfection of wisdom is something that can be attained by all people, whether they are men or women, rich or poor, monks or laymen. So he doesn't even go into this whole delineation of son or daughter, meaning man or woman. And of course, it does say whether they are men or women, but it doesn't really give that kind of hard, fast thing in terms of one's gender being quite clear and not having the instability that would come from other confusion from those who are eunuchs or hermaphrodites, what have you. Okay, so that was all I wanted to share on that. Now we go into the latter part of this where we talk about the actual advice that's being given by Avalokiteshvara. So he says, anybody who's in this category who wants to practice this should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. So here I'm going to just go through a few slides just to kind of remind us of these five aggregates. I think I put them on the screen at the very end of last week and didn't talk about them so much. The five aggregates are form, which is the only one of these that is physical. So this is referring to the body of a person when we talk about these five aggregates in relation to them being the basis for a person. Sometimes in phenomenology in Buddhism, we talk about them as a category of everything that is produced from causes and conditions. In that case, form wouldn't include just the body that we possess. It would include, all the physical things around us that we see, that we hear, that we taste, touch, smell, and so on. So all of those physical objects that arise from causes and conditions would be included at that level. But that's not what's being spoken about here. We're talking about the five aggregates in relation to a person. So in terms of form, it means your physical components, your physical aggregates. By the way, the word aggregates is the translation of the Sanskrit word skanda, which is sometimes translated as heaps. It means a collection of things, a heap of things. So in our form, even though we say we have a body, but that body consists of many parts, right? Many different things that are here. In fact, we can find infinite parts in terms of once we get down into cells and parts of cells and so on, all the molecular stuff going on in our bodies as well. The other four, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness, are all mental aggregates. Feeling and discrimination are two of the 51 mental factors. The remaining 49 are included in compositional factors. And so these are aspects of the mind that are certain functions or attributes of the mind that flesh out our experience. And of course, included within that compositional factors, all the other mental factors are our virtuous states of mind, our afflicted states of mind, and so on. A lot of things that are included in this. Feeling and discrimination were set aside for the reason that they play a key part in our being involved in samsara. When we have a feeling arising, which here is just a feeling tone, a sensation of pleasure, of neutrality, or of pain, we react to those things. And so that's how we get in trouble in samsara, is we have great attachment to what's pleasurable, and indifference towards the neutral, and a great aversion towards what is painful or unpleasurable. And then discrimination is how we discriminate. This is good, this is bad, this is that. And of course, discrimination, especially when it comes to our views, gets us into a lot of trouble. So these two factors are highlighted by the Buddha because they do play a pretty major role in terms of how we go about creating karma and getting caught up in samsara. The fifth one, consciousness, is mentality at the level of just the raw consciousnesses. This would be our five sense consciousnesses: eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and then our sixth mental consciousness, which is mostly our conceptual mind. But consciousness is kind of the bigger bucket in which these other three aggregates: feeling, discrimination, and compositional factors are acting. So I'm just giving a little background on that so that you know what these five are, because they come up throughout the sutra as well as in a lot of teachings of the Buddha, a lot of the discourses and commentaries and so on. So we say that these five are essentially the basis for a person. From Geshe Dakpa's commentary, it says, what are these five aggregates? They are the basis for the designation of a person. That is to say, it is on the basis of the five aggregates that we designate the existence of a person. So let's take it off here. I'm going to come back to this slide in just a moment and go through our commentary for the first part of this on Avalokiteshvara's answer. So again, regarding the second, how Avalokiteshvara answered, the short answer is from Avalokiteshvara said this in the following way. This is this initial little bit that we're going through. And then they should correctly view those five aggregates also as empty of inherent existence. Again, that's the ending part of this. This whole section that kind of is the briefest way for Avalokiteshvara to present the wisdom of emptiness. The extensive answer is from the next part that we're going to get into, again, probably in the beginning of next week. Form is emptiness, or form is empty, up to when the Buddha says, well done, da 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 da, just how it is, just how it is. Anyway, we'll get to all of that. So then he goes on to say, because the individual words are easy to understand, they do not need to be explained. The word also in those five aggregates, also as empty of inherent nature, indicates that not only is the I empty of inherent existence, but the mine also is empty of inherent existence. Now, you might recall we saw the word also earlier when we were talking about last week about Avalokiteshvara, coming to see that the five aggregates also were empty of inherent nature. There, it was related to the fact that all these other categories of phenomena are also empty. Here, it's related to the fact that in this appearance that Avalokiteshvara is having, he has already realized the I is empty of inherent existence. What do we call that? The selflessness of persons. Remember, we've spent a fair amount of time talking about that ahead of time. He's now going on to see the selflessness of phenomena, that the five aggregates are also empty of inherent in nature or inherent existence. So as it says there, not only is the I empty of inherent existence, but the mine also is empty of inherent existence. My body, my feelings, my discriminations, my compositional factors, my consciousness. In other words, these five aggregates that are the basis for a person are phenomena. They are not the person, or else the person would exist inherently. So the Avalokiteshvara is having this experience that is being communicated in this, of saying, that there's also a lack of inherent existence and emptiness with regard to phenomena other than the person. Remember how this is a big distinguishing factor between the lower tenet systems and the higher tenet systems, because they examine the nature of phenomena other than the I, whereas the lower systems only work with the idea of an I in various ways that we posit the selflessness of that I or emptiness of that I. So then it says, thus, it indicates the stages of understanding of the two selflessnesses of persons and phenomena. Of course, empty of inherent existence means empty from its own side. Again, we're going to talk about this a bit more, but it essentially, there's a lot of ways we could describe what is meant by inherent existence, being existing from its own side, existing by way of its own characteristics, substantial existence, objective existence. What we mean is something is capable of setting itself up. It has its own identity inherent within it. So it says here, therefore, it means that phenomena are not established objectively or from the side of the object. For example, when a house appears in a dream is often used as an example of how emptiness is correlated in our waking life. It does not appear from the side of a basis appearing towards the subject, but rather is projected out from the side of the perceiving consciousness. Therefore, it must be understood that the conventional status of phenomena is just like that. We have all these appearances on a basis There was always a basis for what is appearing, but everything lacks any inherent existence as what we are identifying it as. It is our conceptual mind that designates these things, and then there's nothing from the side of the object that determines the identity of the object. So it says, and I'll get into this more, it says, therefore, it must be understood that the conventional status of phenomena is just like that. According to the Prasangikas, inherent establishment is the object of negation, of reasonings analyzing the ultimate. Hence, even though the qualification ultimate is not affixed explicitly to the object of negation, it is affixed implicitly, seeing the aggregates as empty of any inherent nature of their own. It's not saying ultimately in there, but it's meaning through ultimate analysis. This is what we find. This is what we discern. So it says, therefore, recall this, it is of definitive meaning, nirtartha, and is literal, as opposed to something that should be interpreted. Okay, so that's all we're going to cover of this, because now we get into that passage of when it says form is empty, emptiness is form. So let's take a look at, again, I've prepared a number of slides for this because I do think it's important that we spend a little bit of time going into this a little bit more deeply. So first, again, continuing with what Geshe Dakpa says, this first statement that is being made says even or also the five aggregates are completely empty of inherent existence. That means that if we understand that the self, the person, and again, we use sometimes self to refer to the conventionally existent person, sometimes we refer to the object of negation. I know it gets confusing, but just know that, again, that is something I'll try to point out as we go through this. Here, it's referring to the conventionally existent person. We're going to go through some teachings tonight that help us to understand how the person actually does exist. When we talk about the self, the person, we can say that, yes, it's empty of inherent existence. Why? Because it is merely designated on the basis of the five aggregates. Those five aggregates themselves do not inherently exist. They also lack inherent existence. So when we talk about emptiness, it doesn't matter what the object is. What is being negated is the same. If I examine myself, the I, that is Don, that I have this strong attachment to as being real, substantial, inherent within this collection of stuff, that I come to see that it lacks any inherent existence. But then when I look at the basis for Don, the body and mind and so on, all the various components, I see that they themselves also are empty of inherent existence. So it doesn't matter what the basis is necessarily, except that, again, we're going to see that we are encouraged to realize the emptiness of the person, of the I, the self, first. And we're going to get into the reasoning behind why we do that. So the great masters advise us to begin by meditating on the selflessness of the person rather than on the selflessness of other phenomena. So this is why Avalokiteshvara has demonstrated that he has seen already previously the emptiness of the I, which is Avalokiteshvara's identity of an I. There's no inherently existent I there. And he's then going on to realize the selflessness of the other phenomena, which are the basis for Avalokiteshvara, his body, his mind, and so on. In both cases, as I just said, what is negated is exactly the same, namely inherent existence. Remember, we saw this a few classes ago when we looked at how the selflessness of phenomena is set out by Prasangika Madhyamaka. It's the same thing that is negated. It's just whether we're talking about negating an inherently existent I or an inherently existent body or mind or computer or whatever. All phenomena are empty. But he says there, but because we can only think of the person or self in relation to body and mind, it is actually easier to recognize the person's lack of independent or inherent existence. So this is true, right? If we examine this is why, again, when we start, I don't want to revisit what the lower schools say, but they do feel that there is some imputational nature to the self. They say that the self lacks any substantial existence, right? Meaning that it can't exist on its own, independent of the aggregates. That's how that is misperceived as something that can be realized without depending upon the aggregates. They say there is some nature of that. It's true with regard to this school as well. We say that we can see that it does take something else appearing for us to even identify there being an I, right? There has to be the body or the mind, or we wouldn't think I. And we have to see someone else's body. Generally, we don't see their minds, but we have to see their body in order to impute a person on that. So we can see that there is already a bit of an imputational nature with regard to person that's much more apparent than it is with regard to other phenomena. When we talk about a computer, well, a computer sort of seems to cover the entire thing that's in front of me, at least at this time, my computer. It's sort of, again, an entire unit here, even though it's got many, many parts and so on. We think of the computer as kind of being inherently one with all those parts, kind of has that appearance and identity. And so we don't have the ability to think of computer as requiring all of this to appear to us to have the idea of computer. We think it's sort of inherently there. I think it's a little bit easier when we talk about the basis for a person, because when we look at that basis for a person, we get the idea that something of this has to appear for us to identify this as being an I, or for, again, us to identify, people that I'm seeing on the screen as persons. Oh, I can see, John's head, and then I can identify that's John on the basis of that. Okay. So again, this is the logic that we're looking at in terms of why we want to realize the selflessness of persons before we realize the selflessness of phenomena. There's no difference in terms of what's being negated. It's just an easier object to work with in some ways. But there's another reason that's given shortly. Let me go back to our slides and I'll share a little bit more of that. By understanding emptiness with regard to ourselves, the selflessness of persons, we know there is not a truly existent user or enjoyer of phenomena, right? We saw this the same with the other versions of selflessness of persons. We say that, we can't say there's an inherently existent or truly existent person who uses this computer, because if that doesn't exist, then the inherently existent person doesn't exist. There's no inherently existent user or enjoyer of phenomena. Then it is not too difficult to understand that there are no self-existing phenomena to be enjoyed by such a person. This leads to meditation on the selflessness of phenomena, the chief of which are our own aggregates, which are the basis of designation for the I. So he's, again, spelling out that first we examine the I, the person, and we come to see that the person is selfless, is empty of inherent existence, because, again, it's a little bit easier basis to work on. But then we kind of turn our attention out to other phenomena, unlike, again, the lower schools, which don't do that we go to a deeper investigation, and we see that because I lack any inherent existence, it must be true of these phenomena, especially my own aggregates. And that's why, again, there's a huge emphasis on the aggregates in this sutra of Avalokiteshvara, saying, no form is empty, emptiness is form. He starts with the first of the aggregates and speaks to the lack of inherent existence of our own bodies, and goes on to talk about the other aggregates and goes into other categorizations of phenomena. But essentially, this is the stepping stone that we start with our examining the I and realize selflessness of persons, and then we begin to examine things that are other than the I, other than the person, and we come to understand the selflessness of phenomena. So how does it, this is again, Kensur Jampa Tekchog, this is again the book I've been highly suggesting, recommending that you read in conjunction with this. It's going to be hard to read the entire book perhaps in the 8 weeks, but it's a wonderful book to go back to and maybe clarify some of the points after I've talked about them and presented them. But this whole section is really quite nice in his text. How does it come about, though, that first the self-grasping of phenomena arises and then the self-grasping of person? So we just talked about how we realize the emptiness of the person first and then the emptiness of phenomena. But in fact, the arisal of our ignorance happens in an opposite direction. We first have a grasping at phenomena, and then we grasp at the person. So let's see how he explains this. Okay, so first we see the aggregates of the person, just like I saw, John's head. I see the head that is part of his body, his form aggregate. And actually, he says we don't even necessarily have to see the aggregates with our eyes. We may know one of their aggregates in another way, such as hearing someone's voice, feeling that person's hand on our shoulder, thinking about their kindness and so forth. But we have some contact with some element of the person that is not, the person themselves. It is a separate aspect, such as the body, the form of that person. Depending on and following this appearance of one or more of the aggregates, grasping the aggregates as truly existent arises. And this all happens quite naturally due to the force of our ignorance. This is our self-grasping of phenomena, grasping at phenomena as being inherently existent. So the minute that something appears to us, because of our strong habituation to having this ignorance, we immediately grasp at that as existing inherently, truly existing, whatever terms we want to use here. But this is that ignorance that is holding them to exist in that fictitious way. Then, due to this, the appearance of that person's aggregates, we then think, oh, this is Tenzin, or this is John, or this is whoever it is that we are coming into contact with. Following that recognition of the person that is there, that the aggregates are connected to, then arises the grasping of Tenzin or a John or whoever as being truly existent, which is the self-grasping of person. So let me take it off screen for just a moment, and I want to clarify this. So when we talk about, okay, what you guys are seeing on the screen in front of you is my form aggregate, right? You know, part of it. You don't see below here. So anyway, but trust me, it's all there. So anyway, you see my form aggregate. And so when you first come into contact with it, you have a grasping, a subtle grasping at all of this as existing inherently. That's your grasping at phenomena as existing truly or inherently. But then because you identify this as a person, you know, you've got that habituation through your labeling of this collection of stuff with a head and with hands and whatever as being a person, and specifically you know me as Don, you then are grasping, you do the labeling of it, you go, oh, there's Don, but then you grasp at that as being a truly existent Don. Now, we're not saying that this is always going to be present in all of our relating to things in our world, but it's definitely going to be there anytime we have any arisal of any kind of delusion, because this subtle mind of grasping at things as truly existent is the underpinning for all of our delusions, all of our afflictions. In fact, Lama Tsongkhapa says that we can have some consciousnesses to which we are not grasping at with any ignorance. That is not the large part of what we have during our day, but it can occur. Then we can have some where we actually are grasping at things as truly existent, and that's an absolute if we have the delusions arising. So say you're really, angry at Don for, the quizzes that he's giving, the homework that he's giving you in this class. So you have an angry feeling towards Don because you're grasping Don as truly existent, and then you are having a negative view of Don and elevating those negative things that you perceive of Don through the actions he's done and so on, and you're getting angry on the basis of that, having that mind develop. So whenever anger or any delusion is present, it absolutely is there. But then, of course, the third way that Tsongkhapa says that we can relate to things is with actually some wisdom, where it's not that we can do that before we have some wisdom, but we can begin to see things as not being inherently existent. In fact, existing only through the force of designation, as we talked about earlier, when we have some wisdom consciousness with us. Most people only have the first two. They have those brief moments where they aren't grasping at true existence. And again, that doesn't happen with everything, but it happens with some things that we encounter. Most of the time, we have the grasping at things as if they did truly exist, as if they had that inherent existence. And of course, all the delusions then arise on that basis of that ignorance. Sometimes we just have the ignorance, but a lot of times it's because we then get caught up in, all those pleasurable things and have attachment and desire, or we get caught up in those unpleasant things and have our aversion, our anger, and what have you. So just know that, again, the arisal of these begins with phenomena, grasping at phenomena as truly existent, and then grasping at the person. But how we go about realizing the emptiness is we first realize the emptiness of the person, and then we extend that realization to all phenomena, including the aggregates. Is everybody clear about this kind of direction of these? They're formed in terms of phenomena first, and then the person, and then we undo them by realizing the selflessness of persons first, and then phenomena, especially the phenomena that are the aggregates that are the basis for a person. So we're going to see this in a few more slides yet. So in describing how they arise, Khensur Jampa Tekchok says, that is how in our continuum, the self-grasping of phenomena arises, followed by the self-grasping of the person. Based on this, attachment, anger, jealousy, or a host of other afflicted attitudes or emotions may arise, and we then create karma that keeps us bound in psychic existence. Again, through all of this, this is the whole mechanism by which we keep creating our stay in samsara. is through the force of our grasping at phenomena and then going on to grasp at persons, particularly the I that is at the center of all of this, by which we get angry and upset at those around us who don't meet our needs and satisfy us, and we have strong attachment and desire for those things that do. So the self-grasping of phenomena arises, followed by the self-grasping of persons, does not arise every time we apprehend someone's aggregates. However, when we ask, how did my anger or attachment towards someone come about? This is the sequence. So as I said, it's not there all the time. It's not an absolute. But anytime we have a delusion present, anytime we have an anger or attachment towards a person or another object, it's there. This ignorance is there a good part of the time. We'd have to be really, I think, quite clever to be able to see when it isn't there, because it's probably there a good share of our waking days. So then this is a little bit later, and he says, as we have discussed, the self-grasping of phenomena precedes the self-grasping of persons. That is, grasping at the inherent existence of the aggregates, phenomena, arises prior to grasping at the inherent existence of the I, persons. Now recall what I said, people are phenomena, but here when we say phenomena, we mean phenomena other than the person, and the aggregates are other than the person. So in his precious garland, Nagarjuna says, as long as there is grasping at the aggregates, so long the grasping at I will exist. It starts with our grasping at those phenomena other than the person. On the basis of that, we then grasp at the I. Now, again, he's revisiting what we said earlier. When we meditate in order to realize selflessness, though, the sequence is reversed. The Buddha and the great masters advise that first we meditate on the lack of true existence with regard to ourselves, and then apply the same reasoning to understand the lack of true existence of our physical and mental aggregates. Having done that, we then apply it to all other phenomena in order to realize their emptiness of true existence. In fact, this is a measure of whether we have the right sort of analysis going and the right object of negation we've identified, is that we should be able to, once we've analyzed the person, the I, apply the same logic and reasoning to other phenomena, especially again our bodies or minds, and have the same conclusion. We get to the same emptiness. And we will get to the same emptiness no matter what we examine. Computers, trees, books, whatever it is that we look at and analyze to see what its ultimate nature is. So I mentioned earlier that there's an additional reason that is given as to why we do this. Why do we want to realize the selflessness of persons before the selflessness of phenomena other than persons? It's twofold. In our spiritual search, he says, we first grapple with the question of our own and others' dukkha, or suffering, in cyclic existence. Because it is the person who comes from past lives to this life and goes from this life to future lives, understanding the ultimate nature of the person is most important. As I said, this is what it all revolves around. This is what your stay in samsara revolves around, is your clinging to an inherently existent me, this person that we are so tightly caught up in, that we carry from life to life. Thus, our contemplation leads us to inquire into the self-grasping of the person first and meditate on the selflessness of person first, because that is so key to undermining our process of being in cyclic existence. But secondly, he gives the reason that was given earlier. It is easier to realize the emptiness of persons than to realize the emptiness of phenomena. This is because of the relationship between the I and the aggregates, the I and the mind-body complex. The I is imputed independence on the aggregates. As I said earlier, even the lower schools say to some degree we can see this nature of the I, that for there to be an I, we have to have these aggregates here, the mind and the body. It arises on the basis of that. So the analogy of the child of a barren woman will help us understand this, that if a woman is barren from birth, well, cannot have a child, at least that she gives birth to. Obviously can adopt a child, but we're talking about the born child of a barren woman, a non-existent, right? So if we understand the child of a barren woman does not exist, we easily understand that the child's nose does not exist either. In the same way, by first understanding the lack of self-existence with regard to the person, which is a bit easier to understand, we will find it easy to understand that the aggregates that are the basis of designation of the person are also not self-existent or truly existent, inherently existent. So then he concludes this. He says, because the selflessness of persons is easier to understand, it is realized first. It is not realized first because it is a coarser object of negation. Again, the object of negation is the same, inherent existence. Rather, it is realized first because it is relatively easy to understand that without the existence of the aggregates, there would not be an I. Without the mind and the body here, there is no I here. We kind of get it at some level, even at that level of investigation. We're understanding that nature of the I is having some imputational um, quality to it. We haven't gotten yet to discerning exactly, how far this imputation goes, but nonetheless, we can begin that process much easier. In other words, it's not so difficult to understand that when we think I, the appearance of I arises in dependence on the aggregates, right? When I think of myself, if I think of generally my physical form much more than I even think of my mind. There I am in that photo. There I am, can see myself on the screen, when I see a little box with my face in it. This understanding helps to understand that the I does not inherently or exist inherently or from its own side. We can begin to get that a little bit easier because we already see that there's some dependence upon another phenomenon for the I to exist, in this case, the aggregates. For this reason, first there's the realization of the selflessness of persons, later on the realization of that of phenomena. So again, I realize I'm kind of repeating some of this, but I'm using different teachers. This again is Geshe Tenpel, the way that they explain it and talk about it, so that hopefully it starts ringing, ringing true, coming home for each of you. All right, so the three types of wisdom. Why I'm touching on this is because I think it is important that we acknowledge that wisdom is something that we do have to develop through three main sources. And this is a bit hierarchical, but it doesn't mean that once you do one, you can leave it behind and go on to the next. It means that you continually engage in all three of these as best as you can. Wisdom arisen from hearing or listening is what you're doing right now. Or when you go home and read one of these books on the Heart Sutra, or when you listen to other teachings on the Heart Sutra, whatever. Any hearing or listening means bringing in that information that already is helping you to hear things that are true. Hopefully everything I'm saying is true. I'm trying to be very careful with my words so I don't say anything that could be misunderstood. But this is the first way we gain wisdom, is by hearing or listening to teachings that give us some idea, in this case, about emptiness. Though this could be applied to a lot of other teachings in the Buddhist discourses. Wisdom arisen from thinking or reflecting is what you should be doing to some degree now, but mostly after the class. And this would even be what you might call your analytical meditation, where you investigate what it is that you've been heard in this class and try to see it as true for yourself. The wisdom arisen from meditation, this is beyond our current meditation, at least for myself. This requires the support of the mind of calm abiding or higher. It means that we have to have a deeper meditative stabilization in order to actually accumulate that wisdom. But we can begin moving in that direction through our reflecting and thinking about this topic in our meditation. That's why I'm trying to encourage you to meditate on emptiness. And I'm even going to make sure that you do get a meditation on emptiness for tonight. It'll be out in the Dropbox. I'll send that along to Mary and she'll put that out there. That is going to be on what's called the 4-point analysis, which is what I was hoping to go through tonight. I don't know if I'll be able to because I'm not sure we have that much time, but I'm going to try to talk for about another 5 minutes and see if I can get through some of this. Let's skip this and come back to dependent arising. The Buddha set out a number of reasonings to help us to discern selflessness or emptiness. The one that is primarily set out in terms of selflessness of persons is what's called the 4-point analysis or fourfold analysis. It essentially is where we can use this for any phenomenon, but it's very useful with regard to the I and looking at how we are falsely holding on to the I to have inherent existence when it doesn't. So the very first step in this 4-point analysis that, again, it's presumed Avalokiteshvara would have gone through to have first seen the selflessness of persons and then to go on to say that the aggregates are also lacking any inherent nature, is to identify the object of negation. In Tibetan, this is what's called the gakcha. The gakcha is essentially what we are trying to negate. I've already used this term a couple of times tonight. In the case of a person, it is an inherently existent person. We're not negating person in its entirety. the Buddha never said people don't exist at all. You don't exist. Sorry, hate to tell you, you don't exist at all. No, the Buddha said you don't exist in the false way that you think you exist. And that's why it's an object of negation. We have to negate it because it is false thinking. It is a wrong view. It's wrong consciousness. And moreover, it's causing us problems. If it was just a simple wrong consciousness that didn't do much, well, then no big deal. But it's got incredible consequences that are unfavorable for us. So it's very important that we get clear about what it is that we are trying to negate, so we don't negate too little or that we don't negate too much. The second step is determining the possibilities. Sometimes this is called ascertaining the pervasion. It essentially means if the I, in this case, because we're talking about an inherently existent I as being the object of negation, if the I were to exist inherently, it would either have to be inherently the same as the aggregates or inherently different from the aggregates. This is a dichotomy, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Either something is going to be the same or different. If I talk about, are you the same? What is the same as somebody versus what is different from somebody? We see that what is the same as them is a very narrow category. What is different includes everything else. So same and different is a way of analyzing that gets us to exhausting the possibilities. There are really only two possibilities for this inherently existent person. It's either inherently the same as the aggregates that that person is based on, the body and mind, or the collection of those, or it's inherently different, completely apart from the mind and the body, the aggregates. And then we go on in the third and fourth step to analyze each of these, analyze for sameness and analyze for difference. Now, if we have confidence that those are the only two possibilities, well, then we've looked in one place to see if the inherently existent I is the same as the aggregates, and we've looked to see if it's inherently different from the aggregates. There's no third possibility. So let me go through what I can of this just to give you a little bit of background, and then I might just have the slides sent out along and you can read through these. These are from mostly Khensur Jampa Tekchok's book talking about this 4-point analysis. So identifying the object of negation at the beginning of our meditation is crucial. Ascertaining the object of negation is extremely important because if we haven't understood well what is to be negated, we won't be able to ascertain its non-existence with precision. We have to be clear about this false sense of an I that we are holding to, that we are clinging to. And they often say that what is good is to bring up times when we've clung to that very tightly. And that occurs in cases like when we've been accused falsely of something, or when we have been very close to some level of danger where we might have gone out of existence. One of the examples is like if you've ever had that experience, maybe trekking in Nepal or something, where up in the Himalayas, where you have kind of very narrow paths where you could fall, that would be it. You fall to the bottom of this precipice and have the end of your life. Well, the fear that comes up there is attached and rotating around that strong sense of an I. So they encourage you to bring to mind one of these situations where that I has become more prominent. It sometimes is there with favorable experiences as well, very strong, favorable emotions like, pride and things like that, where we feel this sense of self that's more elevated. But it's very clear to see when we have it together with some level of fear or being, again, falsely accused, these sorts of things. So we need to first identify that. It's not to say, again, that it isn't there at other times. It's just more prominent. It's more visible. And this is what we're trying to negate, is that strong sense of a self that seems to be set up on its own, kind of has its own sort of substantial qualities to it that are based on existing on its own without any level of dependence. And again, sometimes we think of that very strongly with regard to the body and the mind. Sometimes we think of it as being a little bit different from these. But nonetheless, this is that innate quality that we are always adhering to in regard to the mind. Let me just do one or two more slides and then we'll take our break. So Rinpoche says in a little pamphlet that he has called Recognizing the False I, this is the most important analysis. Once you recognize this, all the rest of the analyses are easy and make sense. Otherwise, of the two extremes, eternalism and nihilism, there's a great danger of falling into nihilism if we negate too much, of course, is what he's referring to there. This means that even though you went through the analysis, you did it incorrectly. And then you fall into either of these two, eternalism or nihilism. So again, what I have from here on out are explanations of the second and so on, the third and fourth points, and some of the advice from Khensur Jampa Tekchok. So I'm going to again put that in the slides, and they will be out there for you to peruse and take a look at, or you can go to the book by Geshe Jampa Tekchok, Khensur Jampa Tekchok. And if I have time at the end, I'll go back to it. But I would like you to work with this whole idea of this 4-point analysis. And there is a meditation, again, that I will pass along to Mary that she'll post that comes from the basic program. That's a meditation on the 4-point analysis that you can use. And you use it once more. It's very strong with regard to the I. It's a very powerful technique for us to realize that this strong sense of I that we think is here somewhere as existing inherently, as having its own ability to set itself up, having its own identity established from its own side, that doesn't exist at all. So again, maybe we'll take our break now, and then when we return, I'll see what questions have come up in regard to this. But this is really the gist of this class. I mean, I can go through and explain, as I will in the future classes, all what the various words mean and talk about the path and all that. But the point is to pull you into doing this investigation yourself, which I hope most of you have done before. You probably have done through Discovering Buddhism or other classes, some investigation into the wisdom of emptiness. But it's really important that that become a part of this course so that you begin to explore whether things are appearing to you in a correct way or not, whether they actually exist in the way that they appear to you and are apprehended by this mind of ignorance. Okay, so I have 8:23, so let's say at 8:34 we'll resume. So about 11 minutes, okay? So everybody take a little break, stretch, and then we'll come back and see what questions. Okay, good. I have a few questions in the chat box. Those of you who wanted to ask a live question, maybe you should put it in the chat box just to make sure, because I did receive a few personally as well as some that went to everyone. So the very first question from Divya is whether it's possible to have grasping be there without looking at the phenomenon as truly existent. Well, again, we use this word grasping in a lot of different ways. If we're talking about grasping as being the grasping that is occurring through our ignorance, well, then this would be almost, synonymous. The grasping at things as truly existent is going to be there together with whatever other grasping at the object that we have. Now, we can say that we grasp at objects in other ways too, that we might grasp at things in terms of having the particular qualities that we think that they have. But that's within the context of always having this underwriting grasping at true existence. So this happens in terms of the identity of objects, but it also happens in terms of the qualities of objects, the attributes of objects. One thing I might explain here before we go too far and I get into some of the other questions is that Lama Zopa often really emphasizes the way in which this grasping occurs. So what happens? And of course, it's hard for us to recollect times when we first learned about a phenomenon, when we were quite young and we learned the terms for things and kind of formed our own conceptualizations of things in our world. But we do have new objects being introduced all the time, right? Nobody knew what an iPad was before some years ago when the iPad was introduced, right? And so we have these phenomena that do come into our sphere of experience. Let's use the iPad as an example. Well, of course, there were people behind the scenes at Apple that put this whole thing together that they called an iPad, and they introduced it to the world, as an iPad. We hear even in this case, perhaps we even heard the name before we saw the basis for it. But when we are introduced to that, somebody shows us what this basis is that is an iPad. What Rinpoche emphasizes is that there's this initial moment where we're simply labeling. We're simply designating it as such. And this is through the force of somebody saying, and this is the iPad. And they show it to you and you go, oh, wow, that's the iPad. And you put this label onto it. And maybe you've heard even a little bit about what an iPad is, what it does, what have you. You combine all of that kind of meaning of it with your designation of what that object is. But it's in the very split second right after that name is given for it, that it then appears back to us as if it has its own reality, as if it is established from its own side. That is happening due to the force of these very subtle imprints in our minds that have been created since beginningless time through the force of our ignorance. Every time we grasp at something as if it does exist in that way, it creates a seed for it to appear to exist in that way. So if we use the example of the iPad, as soon as we were introduced to the basis and learned the label for that being the basis, or the designation for that basis, we're giving that label of iPad to that. It's as if iPad and the basis now kind of merge. And its iPadness seems to come from out here. It no longer seems to come from our mere designation, our mere imputation. We didn't get into the explanation of dependent arising tonight, but this is the subtlest way that everything exists, is just, and that was alluded to in one of the slides, just through being designated, imputed. But we don't stop there. If we got exposed to the basis and we learned the label and that was it, we just associated with things as merely labeled, well, then we wouldn't get into any trouble. But because it appears back to us as if it's real, the label seems to absorb into it, and then we grasp at that. That appearance back as if it's real from its own side reinforces the ignorance. It gives us a platform upon which we think that we're totally in the right with our grasping at things as inherently existent. Why? Because they appear that way. They appear to have their own identity. An iPad seems to be established from its own side as an iPad. Its iPadness covers the entire basis. And so in that way, we cling to that, and we cling to the self, and we cling to everything in our world because it all appears to exist that way. So when we talk about this grasping, what is the undercurrent of it is, first of all, the ignorance that is involved in that keeps us thinking that everything exists in this way. But there's also this false appearance. You know, I always compare this again. I like using dream analogies because it's very effective for me. It's not always effective for everyone. But when you are dreaming, if you dream like me, I don't know your mind, so I don't know if you dream like me, everything appears to be real in your dream, as real as when you are waking or awakened, right? So when you are dreaming, that level of reality of things appearing as if they are real objects and you associating with them and being in these dream environments with dream activities and what have you, that's all happening with an illusion that it is as real as your waking life. But it's not, right? When we wake up from our dream, we come to understand that those were all dreams. And we might have even had a lot of strong emotions in our dreams, a lot of fear in our dreams when we have a nightmare, or a lot of excitement when something really wonderful is going on in our dreams. So we have a lot of emotions that can come up in our dreams, but they're based on something that isn't real. The dream analogy was used in our text even, right, by Tendar Larumpa. It's a wonderful example to show how something in our current experience can appear to exist one way, but not exist that way at all. And we grasp at it as real. That's why we get so involved in our dreams. That's why sometimes it's even hard to come out of our dreams, because they were so wonderful and delightful in some instances that we wanted to stay there because of that strong grasping, that adherence to that. Well, this is what's happening in regard to all of our consciousnesses. Things are appearing to be real, and we grasp at them as such. And then we have all these emotions. Then we have all of these problems because we're fortifying the strong sense of self that all this is around, and we're fortifying, strengthening the sense of inherent existence of everything that is appearing to us. So it appears that way, and we grasp at it. So the idea here behind the question, again, if we talk about that grasping, which is this ignorance, then obviously it is together with the looking at phenomena as truly existent. They're sort of one and the same. We can begin to undermine that through our reasoning, but the reasoning in and of itself isn't strong enough to do away with, our complete adherence to that, though it can become very powerful until we gain that direct realization of emptiness. And then it becomes something that we know in a much deeper way. So there were a few other questions that Divya had that I want to go into briefly. Some of this I might have touched on a little bit, but how would grasping at a neutral phenomenon appear? Well, we wouldn't have the strong emotion of attachment to the pleasant, or the aversion or anger towards the unpleasant, but we would still have a strong indifference towards the neutral potentially. It might not be present, that grasping or ignorance might not be present with those neutral objects, because it depends upon what we are, thinking about at that time. But nonetheless, it's certainly going to appear to be inherently existent, even if we aren't grasping at it in that way. So the inclination will frequently be still to assent to that appearance, to agree to that appearance. And then we have a subtle form of grasping. It doesn't cause us to get attached or to have aversion, but it still is playing a role in furthering our ignorance, because we never question how things exist. You have to come to teachings like this. You have to study Buddhism to begin to examine, well, how do these things exist? They appear to be existing on their own, from their own side, but they actually don't exist that way at all. And we have to, kind of be led into that investigation. So neutral things would appear to us potentially as, they always appear as inherently existent. It depends on what we're doing more specifically that would cause us to arise at some level of grasping. If we're not having any real strong emotion arise, then we would probably be having just a simple form of grasping at it as real, as inherently existent, having its own identity, but it would be very, very subtle because we're not having those stronger emotions. And then another question, how is it that we cannot grasp at a phenomenon once we understand it conceptually as arising in dependence on my imputation? In other words, what I'm getting from that question is, how does our understanding of dependent arising undermine that ignorance? Well, this is a process that I think we have to engage in repeatedly. It's not that once you hear one teaching on dependent arising that you go, oh, wow, I don't need to grasp at anything as inherently existent ever again. It's a process of continuing to move that closer and closer to the edge, closer and closer to making sure that we have negated what is really meant by inherent existence. If we really begin to understand the way in which this is working at a very subtle level, our buying into reality and the way that things appear through this grasping, this ignorance, then we see that if things are merely imputed, if they have no more reality than that, then everything we are grasping at is fiction. It's pure fiction. If we say that everything is nominally existent, which is what the implication is of things being dependent in the end upon mere designation, mere imputation, it's only existing by name only, meaning that there is a basis for everything that we name, right? I mean, I can't just say, oh, there's an elephant in my room. See the elephant back there? No, there's no elephant. There's no basis for an elephant. But when there is a basis, the only way that that exists as what we are designating it as is through our designation. It has no identity as elephant from its own side, those parts of an elephant, the four legs and the body and the ears and the tusks and the trunk and whatever, the tail. I mean, all these are the parts that we designate, give that label of elephant to. And then when we analyze, we see that there's no real elephant from those parts. We kind of get this back and forth. We see that things exist in dependence upon mere imputation, and they lack any inherent existence. And we keep working with these two things of realizing dependent arising and emptiness. And over time, it starts to loosen up. We start seeing things as having very, very slight existence. As Rinpoche often says, it's almost as if things don't exist. Now, this gets into that whole idea of the third question that Divya sent on to me. Can you explain more on the danger of falling into eternalism and nihilism while doing this analysis? How would that happen? Well, if we look at these two extremes, right now we're over in this extreme of what's called eternalism. It means that we are clinging to things as inherently existent. And of course, if we don't go far enough in our determining what this object of negation is, we're going to still have some of that clinging there. That's why that first step of the 4-point analysis is so important. We have to get the right definition of this so that we move away from that eternalistic view that we're in, thinking that things exist inherently. But this is where we'll continually fall if we don't do this type of analysis. When we begin to move towards this, though, there is the tendency sometimes to go too far. We, throw the baby out with the bathwater in a sense. We negate more than what needs to be negated. And in that way, we think that things don't exist at all. As I pointed out earlier in my lecture, the Buddha never said people don't exist at all. The Buddha didn't say, you need to stop your suffering by thinking that you don't exist. We can think we don't exist, but how do we prove to ourselves that we don't exist? That's a much tougher thing to do. The Buddha says you exist only in name, again, nominally existent, through dependent arising at the subtlest level, through that mere imputation, mere designation. That's enough for existence. That keeps you from falling into the extreme of nihilism. You still do exist, but the way you exist is so very, very slight. It's as Rinpoche says, almost as if you don't exist. But the almost is what keeps you from falling into that precipice. Lama Tsongkhapa himself in his Lamrim Chenmo spends a fair amount of time talking about defining this object of negation so that we don't negate too much and fall into a nihilistic view. And then if we do that, of course, the consequences are pretty severe. We think, well, I don't exist, karma doesn't exist, rebirth doesn't exist, enlightenment doesn't exist. You'd end up into a pretty miserable state. But if we don't go far enough, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing. We're going to keep creating the causes for our own suffering and samsara, as well as our own unenlightened existence. And we'll never attain the state of Buddhahood and benefit others. So we have to get both of these in play, making sure we've gone far enough in our object of negation, but also making sure we haven't gone too far. Hence the middle way. This is what the middle way really means, is finding that razor thin edge, if you will, between these two extremes, so that we can abide in that place where we aren't completely negating everything entirely, but yet we're negating enough to get us out of the mess that we're in. So let me go on to if we accept dependent arising, how do we avoid falling into nihilism? Hopefully I've explained that now through what I just said. Is it the subtle consciousness that is what is self-grasping and returns through rebirth? Well, again, our consciousness is embedded with, or imprinted with, all of our, delusions and all of these obscurations, both the afflictive obscurations and the knowledge obscurations, which again, I explained briefly earlier, but essentially by knowledge obscurations, we mean those subtle imprints that cause things to appear as if they're real. But our grasping at that and all of the delusions that arise on that, we remove those first, and then we eventually remove these subtler obscurations that cause this dualistic appearance, this false appearance. But all of that, all of those obscurations sort of travel with the mind. Now, there is a sort of thread of subtle consciousness that goes from life to life. In the tantric teachings, they teach about this being the clear light mind that is sort of at the core of our consciousness. And of course, all the grosser levels of consciousness sort of are around that in a sense. You can't talk about it in those physical ways, but essentially they spring up whenever, like in our human existence, most of our time is gross awareness, right? We're dealing with our mental consciousness involved in conceptual thinking, our five sense consciousnesses involved in the world around us. All of this is a very gross level of consciousness. But there are subtler states, as we see, and sometimes in the dream, as well as we go into the death process. And then at the moment of death, when death actually happens, is what's called the mind of clear light, which is ever present. It's always there. Now, again, how are these things carried from life to life? That's a much more complicated issue that I don't know that I want to get into tonight, how Prasangika Madhyamaka says that these are carried. But absolutely, all of this gets carried forward from life to life and forces us through that strong grasping at a self to continue to take rebirth. That's mostly what we mean by the afflictive obscurations, that strong grasping at a self that we are, once we become disembodied from this body, we go seeking another body. We grasp at that. We are continually grasping at the sense of some sort of an inherent identity that we want to maintain, even though the I doesn't exist that way at all. And then, of course, we have the subtle imprints that are coming along with this that keep us from being a Buddha, that keep us from having perfect knowledge of both ultimate and conventional truth. So I guess, again, there's kind of two questions in there. Dependent arising keeps you from falling into nihilism. That was the first part. And then the second part, the subtle consciousness is where all of this, we could say, sort of is carried forward. That mechanism, again, is a bit complicated to talk about, but essentially we have the seeds or the imprints of everything that has occurred within the mind going forward until it is exhausted, until it brings forth its result, all of those karmic imprints and so on. And then when we eventually, disable all of that through our wisdom directly realizing emptiness, we cease taking rebirth, and eventually we cease being unenlightened and become a Buddha. I don't know if that's sufficient in explaining it. Quickly go over the five aggregates once more. I think there was another one. Maybe no, I think that was it. That was from David. I'm sorry, those questions. So again, I hope I answered those, David. Could you quickly go over the five aggregates? Again, the five aggregates, the very first one is the only one that's physical. It's form. So it includes everything from the top of your head down to your feet, everything that is considered your body. And that's, again, I'm talking about the 5 aggregates here as the basis of a person, the basis for designating a person. The other 4 are all mental. Let's go to the 5th one, the last one. The last one is consciousness, and by that we mean our 5 sense consciousnesses and our mental consciousness, which is sort of the bigger arena in which all of this is happening. I'm actually teaching on Tuesday nights for the Florida group a course called Minds and Mental Factors, and it's about these main minds, consciousnesses, the 5 sense consciousnesses and the mental consciousness, and then the mental factors that flesh out that experience. Because mind by itself doesn't know in the specific ways that our minds are capable of without certain factors of the mind being operative. And among those factors, the Buddha identified 51 that are set out as a good starting point to understand the mechanics of our mind, the psychology of our mind. And they include our non-virtuous states of mind, our virtuous states, and so on. And then we have more functional components of it. And feeling and discrimination are 2 of the more functional ones that the Buddha delineated as separate aggregates. So all the other 49 mental factors that the Buddha delineated are in this third of the mental, 4th of the aggregates, what we call, again, compositional factors. Feeling and discrimination are the 2nd and 3rd aggregates that we set out separately, and that's because the Buddha highlighted them as being quite involved in creating our problems, our difficulties. As I pointed out, the feeling experiences that we have, the sensations that we get from various things in our life often cause our attachment to arise towards what's pleasurable, our indifference towards what is neutral, and our strong aversion, anger towards what is unpleasant. And this is how it all starts. Even just having an awareness of feeling being operative in all of this is already a step in the right direction, because we can simply see these as feeling tones. They're simply arising. Everything else is up to our minds, especially our thought consciousness, as to how we are going to react to those feelings. Discriminations is the discriminating factor that says this is this, that is that, but it gets very complicated in our world when we start holding to particular views. This is good, this is bad, this is a friend, this is an enemy, whatever. We go into all of these discriminations, and they also become the basis for a lot of afflictions arising. So again, those 2 were highlighted by the Buddha as part of these heaps or aggregates, but essentially they are mind and body. I'm sorry, mind, the 4, and body. So we have the body being the form aggregate, the other 4 being part of the totality of what we call mind, each of them again highlighted for a particular reason. I don't know if that helped. Did that help? Okay. All right. Any other questions from the audience at large? I hope this is helpful. I mean, it's very hard. I mean, I love being back in the classroom. I'm looking forward to the day when you can actually see people and kind of interact in a much more direct way and kind of get where everybody's at. All I get is silence. So I'm not sure that everybody's, maybe I need a little thumbs up from people if you're getting it. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and do our prayers, and if there are no further questions. And what we'll do again is I'll do the prayers for the dedication of all of this, and then Shanka will lead you all in a discussion that will follow from this. And those of you who would like to stay, again, discussion is a really important part of deepening our knowledge. We said wisdom through hearing, wisdom through thinking. It's part of the wisdom through thinking to a large degree. It's you then articulating your thoughts about what you heard tonight, and articulating even what that means in terms of your questions that arise on the basis of that. So the discussion is an important way of furthering our wisdom by digesting the material a little bit deeper than just getting the words, unidirectionally from me. So, all right, Bob, so let's go ahead and put the prayers on the screen. Thank you. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen rise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. And then we dedicate for our precious teachers, again, seeing how we do depend upon teachings, receiving the advice of these amazing gurus and their teachings in order to realize emptiness and so on. We make strong prayers for their good health and long lives. As we recite these three prayers, extend that thought out to all other spiritual guides. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. You who uphold the subduer's moral way, who serve as the bountiful bearer of all, sustaining, preserving, and spreading Manjunath's victorious doctrine, who masterfully accomplish magnificent prayers honoring the three jewels, Savior of myself and others, your disciples, please, please live long. Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please, please live long. And then dedicate for anyone that you're holding in your heart right now. Those who are experiencing great obstacles to their well-being, those who have illness, who are dying or who have died, send this positive energy out to them so that they receive all the benefit of what we've done here tonight, removing their suffering and helping them to have all the causes of happiness. And may all beings find true peace and happiness through what we've done here this evening. So I'll remind everybody, again, we do have His Holiness's teaching coming up on Sunday. It's going to be on emptiness and this profound path of the middle way. I don't know what His Holiness will be able to cover in an hour and a half or so, but it'll be an interesting teaching, I'm sure. Keep in mind, I am teaching some other classes here and there. The one that's starting this week that I thought I should just let people know about, another basic program course for the Taoist group for Siddhi Garba, Tibetan Buddhist Center up in Taos. I'm going to start teaching the Mahayana mind training, the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, tomorrow, and that will continue through the end of April. So that'll be Thursdays from 6 to 8 mountain time. So anyway, I just thought I'd let you know about that. If you need any information on that, let me know and I'll be happy to pass that along. All right, enjoy your discussion. Thank you all, Bob and Mary, Shanka, for all your help in supporting this, everyone else for being here, and I'll see you soon. Please stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, John.